ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Grand Slam Journey podcast, where I, together with my guests, discuss various topics related to finding our passion and purpose, maximizing our potential, sports, life after sports, and transitioning from one chapter of our lives to the next, growing our skills and leadership in whatever we decide to put our minds into. For my guest today, area of entrepreneurship by building community for athletes by athletes. If you're someone following the NFL, my guest today needs little to no introduction. I bring you Christian Ponder. Christian Ponder is a former American football quarterback. He played for the Minnesota Vikings, Oakland Raiders, Denver Broncos, and San Francisco 49ers. He played college football at Florida State and was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings with the 12th overall pick in the 2011 NFL Draft. He started all 16 games and helped lead the team to a playoff in 2012, but also suffered several injuries. Christian and I talk about his journey to the NFL, including his early dreams of playing college football at Florida State and the importance of preparation, work ethic, and taking advantage of opportunities. Christian explains the demands of being a quarterback, including the mental preparation and leadership required. He discusses the pressure that comes with the position and how it requires a steady mindset. He also talks about the journey of becoming an NFL quarterback and the competitiveness of the position. We talk about the impact of injuries on our athletic performance and the frustration of not being able to control them, but highlighted the resilience and mindset that athletes develop through dealing with adversities. Christian talks about the importance of mental preparation in sports. He shares his insights on the mental side of sports and how it can make a difference in our athletic careers. He advises parents and young athletes to avoid specializing in one sport too early and to focus on self-improvement with a smart plan and choosing the right coaches. We then talk about his decision to retire from the NFL and his transition into finance. He shares the story of how he went from working in finance to developing an app for football players, and eventually identifying the need for a community to help athletes transition out of sports, which led him to start The Post. The Post is a community created by former elite athletes, Christian Ponder himself, and made for elite former athletes. Christian shares his personal experience of transitioning out of professional sports and the challenges he faced, and what prompted him to become the builder and creator of this community. He emphasizes the importance of community for athletes and how the Post was created to provide a space for athletes to belong and support each other. He also highlights the unique skill sets that athletes possess and how they can be effective leaders in business. Christian describes the 4 pillars of Athlete Network and how they design the product around those pillars, and offers insights into the program curriculum with focus on introspection and goal setting. And last but not least, we dive into the motivation behind the Post itself, emphasizing the need for a supportive network and a safe space to be vulnerable. Christian does a great job describing all it means to be an athlete. It is probably one of the best descriptions I have heard, and so I hope you enjoyed the listen. If you do enjoy it, please share it with someone you believe may enjoy it as well. Consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to subscribe to not miss the next episode. Last but not least, I had some Zoom issues during the recording, and so I apologize for the lack of mic quality in the middle of the recording. And now I bring you Christian Ponder. Thank you for accepting my invitation to be a guest on Grand Slam Journey podcast. The podcast was started with a mindset of having exactly guests like you who play professional or highly competitive sports and now transitioning to the next chapter of their lives and taking the lessons we have learned through the sports to our next, what I call the civilian second part of the life. And you're actually doing fantastic things now with the Post. And so before we dive to many things, athletics and your new passion, I want to give you the opportunity to please introduce yourself.
My name is Christian Ponder. I am co-founder and CEO of The Post, which we can talk about in a little bit. But before that, grew up outside of Dallas, Texas, where football is pretty much a religion. And so grew up playing all sports, but football clearly became my strength when I was in high school, which led me to go play quarterback at Florida State University, which is where both my parents went to school. And my dad played football there as well and played for the great Bobby Bowden, which was a tremendous experience there. And was drafted first round by the Minnesota Vikings. And so growing up in Texas, going to school in Florida, and then going to live in Minnesota was a pretty eye-opening experience that first winter, but had a great time there. Spent 6 years in the NFL, bounced around, first 4 years in Minnesota, then to Oakland and Denver Broncos, and then finished in San Francisco 49ers in 2016, and moved to New York City in August of 2017 to start the next chapter of my life, which was in finance. I was excited for the next chapter. I got my undergrad in finance, got my MBA, and actually started a second master's while I was still playing at Florida State. And my dad's in finance. So for me, that organic transition was to start there. And if I was going to be in finance, why not move to the financial capital of the world? So that's where we are today. I'm no longer in finance. Again, I'm now at the Post building this from the ground up. I have 3 kids. My wife, Samantha, who works for ESPN, covers the NFL and the Sunday NFL Countdown show Sunday mornings. And my 3 kids, they've got 2 girls and 1 boy, a 9-year-old girl named Scout, a 6-year-old boy named True, and a 5-year-old girl named Price. And so every day is an adventure. It's a lot of fun, especially raising the kids in Manhattan. So a lot of them on plate, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Wow, fantastic. And I look forward to diving into so many things with you. I was so excited and obviously reading about your background. And I've never talked to a professional NFL player. So I'm so curious about football. Coming from the Czech Republic, soccer is the football there. We don't really have football. And so It took a whole awakening of my American journey. And I so love this sport now that if I ever was born a guy and I had athletic skills, that would be the sport I would love to play. So I'm curious about learning about your own journey and the sport.
Especially for you to go from the Czech Republic to the Dallas Cowboy, like the world of the Dallas Cowboys in Texas, where football is king. And so, it's funny because my sports journey really started early on where I just was obsessed. I'm one of 3 brothers. I have 2 brothers, an older who's 18 months older than me and a younger brother who's actually about 7.5 years younger than me. And so my older brother and I were always just super competitive. And so sports was our outlet. And especially with my dad who played football and my mom who was an athlete her whole life. And so, we were always watching sports on TV and that became our outlet. So, as a tall toddler, having a baseball bat in my hand and played a lot of baseball, basketball. At one point, I did a kids triathlon where we did all the race stuff, which I wasn't that excited for, or an anaerobic athlete. So to do long distance running and swimming and biking was not up my alley, but tried that, did soccer, did lacrosse, tried whatever my parents allowed me to do, did some hockey for a couple seasons. And obviously football became where really I excelled. It didn't happen early on. Actually, the first year I played football, I hated it because I wanted to be the quarterback. And now this was Pee Wee football. I was probably maybe 7 or 8 years old. And, at that time, the quarterback was usually the coach's son, which was the case for this team. And because I was probably a taller kid, they put me as a tight end. And at that age, no one's throwing the football. So the tight end really was the 6th offensive lineman. And I hated it. And so I quit halfway through the season. And then didn't pick it up again until middle school and really started off. I was like the B string quarterback, then the backup A string quarterback, and then the starting freshman quarterback for the freshman team, and just kept climbing the ladder. And some things worked out in my favor. But football was a great game. It's talk about just the amount of work ethic that has to go into it, the hard work, the preparation. but it's such a team sport. I mean, having 11 guys that have to be on the same page for a play to be successful. And really as a quarterback, you learn the need to depend on and trust on your teammates, because if one other guy of the 11 on the team don't do their job, then especially as a quarterback, like you could potentially pay for it. And so just really love the sport. Now it's been really cool, to spend so much time as a player, but now to be a fan and be on the other side of it. And it's funny, I hated fantasy football as a player because it created a weird dynamic between player and fan. Like there was some sense of ownership. But now as a fan, like I love fantasy football because it keeps me engaged, and especially engaged in games that I would never watch casually, but still a big fan. And yeah, it's the greatest sport. It was a great time to grow up and have the opportunity to play it at a high level.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm actually a little bit more curious if you can go into the dynamic of quarterback, because secretly, I was like, that's just such a high stakes position. Like from my view, obviously I've never played football. It's where you help create the game, and you talked about the teamwork and collaboration, but how do you get to that position? Because I'm guessing, as you a little bit mentioned, many people want to be quarterbacks, right? So it's definitely highly competitive. What does that journey look like to gain that role?
Look, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of preparation. It's a lot of like being able to handle high amounts of pressure, right? I think what initially drew me to being in that position was the amount of control that quarterbacks have in the game, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But for me, it was a good thing, right? I wanted the ball in my hands. I wanted to be a part of every play on offense. And it requires a certain level of intelligence and understanding of the game, because you have to know your plays, but you have to know what the defense is doing, which that probably applies to every position. But the quarterback, it probably requires the most amount of mental preparation and work. And yeah, I wanted to be in the mix. I wanted to have a say or element to every play. And so that's what initially drew me to it. And then, it's just so much work, because it's working on the mental side of the game, the understanding defenses and offensive schematics, but also, the right throwing motion and footwork, right? Like tennis obviously requires a lot of mechanics and being really on top of your fundamentals mechanically. And same thing with quarterback. And, it was a tremendous leadership position. I learned from so much of my teammates and from my coaches, and I enjoyed that being on my shoulders. But again, like at times where the pressure was a lot, and the pressure was hard, because for good or bad, right? If you have a good game, you're kind of the hero. If you have a bad game, you're the villain. And it was very much a roller coaster ride. And being quarterback required that steady keel of like, you had to be in it mentally. You couldn't ride the roller coaster of the up and downs of a season or even a game. And so it's definitely a demanding and hard position, but I really loved being in that position and having an impact on the game on every play.
I'm curious also about your journey to NFL, because is it like 1% of people maybe at best make it? What are the steps through obviously starting very early to then high school, college, and being drafted? What does it mean? And what are some of the key aspects that, as you look back, that really helped you get to the NFL quality of play?
I was having a conversation earlier with a National Lacrosse League player who's on our team at the Post, this idea that preparation builds confidence. And so regardless of what level of football I was in, I mean, especially the quarterback, preparation mattered, work ethic mattered, the effort that you put in mattered. And so as a kid, actually, I never had dreams of playing in the NFL. My dreams were to play college football at Florida State. And so that's what I wanted to work towards. And it probably wasn't until my freshman or probably my sophomore year of high school where I thought, okay, there were some signs that I was good enough to actually go do that. And then got the full scholarship offer to go play at Florida State after my junior season, the summer between my junior year and my senior year in high school. But like every journey, it starts anew, right? When I stepped on campus at Florida State is, first being kind of the big man on campus at high school to being like the fifth string quarterback in college and really having a not so good first year, even as a fifth string guy, like not practicing well and just being really down on myself. And then it was really about luck. I mean, our offensive coaching staff was let go after my freshman year, and a new coaching staff came in, and my offense coordinator and quarterback coach, his name Jimbo Fisher, who's now the head coach at Texas A&M, and became the head coach at Florida State after I had left, or well, actually my senior year, and then won a national championship at Florida State after I left. And just really built a good relationship with him and learned a ton. I think his coaching style fit me really well as a player. And so some of it was luck, but it was taking advantage of the opportunity that I was given and making sure that I worked my butt off and at least put in every effort I could to fulfill the dream of now being at Florida State, but now potentially being able to be a starter. And then once you become a starter, right, it's like, okay, now you have to prove yourself to stay in that position. You have to prove yourself to be an NFL quality player. And I remember some good games where I was like, okay, maybe I can play in the NFL, my first year. And then my second year, having an extraordinary year where I thought, okay, I can go be a first round draft pick, which I probably would have left early to go to the draft. I had a shoulder injury that ended my season after the 9th game and couldn't finish that season. So I actually came back for my senior year and had an okay season, and then was drafted first round as the 12th overall pick with the Vikings. And again, it was like, okay, now the journey starts anew. It's like, now you have to go prove yourself at this level. And it was an interesting year for me. We had a lockout season. So traditionally when someone's drafted in the NFL, you immediately go with that team. You start off-season training workouts with the team for 2 months, April, May, part of June. And then you kind of take a break and then you come back in July to start training camp, get ready for the season. Well, for us, because there was a lockout, we had none of that. And so my first experiences with the team didn't start until training camp. And so the learning curve was a lot steeper, but, got to start however many games, 20-something games in the NFL, which was such a tremendous opportunity. I wish I would have played better than I did. I think my confidence level was always negatively impacted after my injury. I just never felt like I was the same player after I hurt my shoulder in college, but just had a tremendous experience and had a lot of fond memories of playing in the NFL.
Are there any specific moments, Christian, that really stands out to you that you want to highlight your personal career? And it could be actually even college or some of the games that you really still remember.
Well, it's funny. I don't know how you are as an athlete. The ones that I tend to remember are usually the bad games, right? I think about the mistakes that I made or the ones that, gosh, if I would have not thrown that interception or made that mistake, we would have won that game, which would have got us to the championship game or whatever. So those are the memories that stick out to me. But definitely a lot of memories that I'm proud of. I mean, when I was in college, we had the first 10-win season in about a decade. My senior year, we beat the University of Florida for the first time in like 7 years or something, which was a big deal for us. I mean, that's our big in-state rival. In Minnesota, we made the playoffs my second year, and we beat Green Bay Packers, which was our big rival in Minnesota for the first time in a while, and went head-to-head with Aaron Rodgers and was able to win the last game of the year to make the playoffs, which I was tremendously proud of. But definitely a lot of great memories back, even high school and obviously college and the NFL, and a lot to be proud of.
One additional thing I wanted to ask, even looking at your past, and you mentioned injuries. I feel like that's such a big part of sport. I've gone through many injuries myself, and it is so hard to deal with when you're playing the game and really the whole future depends on your physical ability to perform.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a shoulder issue already in college. What has the journey been like, even in NFL? It seems like you've suffered through a number of injuries. And I was like, in football, is it just another thing? If I saw some of the big guys chasing me, I would turn around and run the other way because it's just amazing the power and speed and obviously mass volume they're able to generate. So how do you deal with that mindset of knowing that you need to stay healthy, but playing 100% and then dealing with injuries overall?
When you're in the moment, right? When you're in the game, it's not like you're ever thinking about, I'm sure you were the same way in tennis. Like you just wanted to win. You did everything you could to win. There wasn't anything about self-preservation, right? In the moment, in the heat of battle, right? So everything took place before and after. And I think there was a lot to the maintenance and the rehab and everything. And I think, what was always frustrating if I think back to my career and you probably the same if you dealt with injuries is like, it's really challenging and frustrating to have injuries that hold you back where you can never be 100%. You're only playing at 70, 75%. And so the good thing is it is an equalizer. Every athlete deals with that. And that's a part of sport. And I think, there's a resilience and a mindset that athletes develop through dealing with those adversities. And that's that's a part of the game. But it can be very difficult. And you just try your best that if you are injured, like you get as much rehab and treatment as you can. And then you try to do all the things in between when you're not hurt to better prepare your body. And it's funny because we make so much of those investments as athletes, and like we should be doing the same thing as business people, right? Whether it's taking care of our minds and less our bodies, but even our bodies, because so much of our nutrition and how we work out and take care of our bodies has an impact on our performance when it comes to time in the workspace. But as an athlete, for sure, it was obviously such a tangible thing to make sure that we were taken care of. But it was frustrating at times. I mean, it brought your performance level down, and you just had to find creative ways to try to navigate not playing to your best. But it was definitely frustrating.
I wanted to dive a little bit on the injuries as well, because I feel specifically in the past, it was so hard for me to stay positive through that. So it was the safest for everyone to be far away. I was like, I'm injured, don't even talk to me. Once I recover, I'll be a way better person.
So true.
Have you found any trick how to be patient with that process of recovery?
I don't, because what's so frustrating from an athlete standpoint is we're always talking like control what you can control, and you couldn't control the injuries, right? It was so frustrating. And because it also had a clear negative impact on your performance, it was hard. And so that's, I think some of the best athletes, look, it's a part of sport, and they conquer the mental side of it. I mean, as you know, like, especially tennis, was it the mental game of tennis or whatever that book is that everyone talks about? Tom Brady was the one that said, like, helped him in his career. I think people always, especially from football, always focus on the physical side of the game. But I think, across the board, talent only gets you so far. It's really the mental side of the game that makes the best. I mean, I think about Tiger Woods. I think about Derek Jeter. I think about Peyton Manning's and Tom Brady's of the world, Serena Williams. Like, they conquer the mental side of it. And whether that's dealing with injuries or any sort of adversity throughout game or a season, like, they get the better of it, or at least they're better than their opponent at making sure that they're sharp on the mental side. And so every athlete, and again, even this goes well beyond sport, conquering or mastering that mental side goes a lot farther, I think, than the physical side, at least at a certain level when you get to certain tier.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe before we go to your new adventure, the post, one more question, because many people listening perhaps have kids who aspire to be football players.
Yeah.
Any tips to parents or anybody who may be young and listening, wanting to be collegiate level football player or perhaps aspiring to make it to NFL?
Yeah.
What would you share with them?
Speaking to parents or even like young kids, first of all, like, don't specialize in a sport. The environment of youth sports is so different than when I grew up. People are specializing at a very early age of picking one sport and sticking to it. And I think there's a lot of data around mental fatigue and hitting walls when you focus on one sport. And there's also a lot of data around the deterioration of certain ligaments and muscles because they're so focused on one sport. And there's a lot of data on the importance for our bodies and the mental side of the game of playing a lot of different sports. And the long-term development is a lot better for you. And then obviously as things get clear, as you get to an older age, okay, maybe picking one or two sports in high school makes more sense. Any sport, whether it's football or tennis or baseball or whatever, again, I think it goes back to this idea of preparation, right? Work ethic helps a lot. And so if you can work hard, and you can work hard with a plan, right? I think being smart in how you work. So identifying the things that you need to improve upon. I think the best athletes always were so good at self-scouting. What am I doing well? But more importantly, what am I not doing well? And how do I make a specific intentional plan to pour more investment of my time and effort to improve in the skill set that I'm not good at? And how do I identify the right coaches that will help me in those areas that I need to improve? It's not that hard, right? It just takes effort. And that'll get you a lot farther than other people.
Love it. Speaking about effort, you've put a lot of effort into your NFL career, and then you decided to retire in 2016. I'm always curious what that process or decision process even is, and that transition. You mentioned you wanted to move into finance and move towards New York, which didn't actually end up being the plan fully, seems like. So tell me a little bit about that and your path to starting the Post.
Yeah, my last year, so finished in San Francisco in 2016. I think I probably would have kept playing with the 49ers. There was a coaching change and didn't have the opportunity to keep playing, but I did have offers from two other teams in different cities. And at that point, my oldest child was over one at the time. My second was on the way. And I just decided I didn't want to uproot my family every year and kind of be that consummate journeyman football player. And so for me, it was a clear sign that it was time to move on to the next thing. And as I mentioned earlier, I was actually excited about the next chapter of my life. On paper, it seemingly I had it together, but that still didn't make that transition easier. I mean, it was great to move to New York City and be a part of this environment where there's so much energy in the city and there's so much going on, but it still didn't make that transition less difficult. I think there are a lot of things that athletes deal with as they transition out that are really rooted in kind of identity issues, right? Like we've been an athlete for so long, it's who we are. And we get a sense of purpose around that. And suddenly that sense of purpose is gone. But there's also a lot around routines, right? Like our whole days were structured around our sport and where we needed to be and what we need to do. And often we were told by someone else where we needed to be and the things that we needed to do. And so not having that structure around our lives was difficult. But what I realized more important than anything, the biggest impact I had was the lack of community, right? I've been on teams and in locker rooms surrounded by athletes since I was little. And athletes are my tribe. Like that's my community. Those are the people I get along with best, who I have most in common with. And for the first time in my life, I was now removed from that community and I was trying to navigate all these other issues by myself. And so as I started to fill that void of not being on a team or in a locker room or part of something anymore, I started to look for things that would fill that void. And so I joined other communities in New York City, some like Soho House, and looked at some other clubs. There's a place called Core Club. I looked at more professional networks like EO or YPO and some of these things on the business side. And all are tremendous organizations that provide a lot of value to their members. They just didn't fill that void for me. They weren't filled with athletes. And what's unique to athletes is the skill sets that define athletes. We at the Post, we call it the AOS, the athlete operating system, right? Like iOS at Apple. And the AOS is really about that mindset that athletes have. It's dealing with that adversity, right? That perseverance, that grit, that competitiveness, the work ethic, the grittiness, the ambition. It's not unique to athlete, but it defines athlete. And that that mindset doesn't disappear just because we're done playing. It's with us for the rest of our lives. And when we were on teams and in those environments, we were positively impacted by being around people that shared that same mindset. And so I missed being a part of that group and them making me better because being in those groups made me better. And so when I realized that being a part of these other groups weren't scratching that same itch that being a part of the athlete community did, we decided to go build it. And so we started studying a lot of these community-based businesses, whether it was Chief or YPO or Soho House, and took a lot of what worked well at these other places, but tailored it to athletes. And what started originally off as a space just to give athletes a place to belong now has evolved into this idea that athletes make tremendous leaders. I mean, the skill sets that made you a great athlete are the exact same skill sets that make you a really effective leader in business. And if you look at the data, people who've played NCAA sport only make up 1.5% of the US population, but they account for 52% of women in the C-suite today. They account for 15 of the last 21 US presidents. They account for an outsized number of Fortune 500 CEOs. And so there's a pretty massive disparity between athletes and non-athletes. And it's because of that mindset and because of the things that we went through as athletes that transitioned so well to business. So the Post was once started as just a community for athletes, now has evolved to, because of its exclusivity to the athletes, to building this really powerful and effective and dynamic and diverse leadership network exclusive to, there's so many athletes doing tremendous things across all industries and leadership positions, and how we bring them together around that athlete identity to build this space of athletes helping athletes, just like we did when we were playing.
I love that. And that definitely something that attracted me to have a conversation with you, because when you started the Post, I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. And personally, I resonate even any corporate job that I've had. If I meet another athlete, I don't know why, but there was some sort of natural connection. It's really hard to explain, but it's just this feeling like, oh, you get it. Like, you know what, the amount of time and effort and perseverance that goes into it. And it's really hard to explain it in words. Maybe you, Christian, since you're doing the Post, how would you explain to people what it's about in the Post community that you're creating?
I think that connection that you talk about, look, athletes are unique. Athletes are different. And I think it's the things that we put our bodies through. And I think there's a mutual respect, but I also, it goes back to like behavioral science, right? we feel more connected to people that remind us of ourselves. And if we look at athletes that have played at really high levels, I mean, there's so much in common, the shared life experience, the shared interest systems, the shared value system that creates so much opportunity to connect because of that commonality. And for us, communities are built on commonality with boundaries. And so building boundaries of this community around that identity and that mindset and that experience of athletes who've played NCAA or Olympic or professional sports. And so how do we bring them in one community? That's like the baseline of where we start. But then on top of that, this whole idea is how do we recreate that team sport environment ecosystem we had when we were on teams where you had your teammates, right? You had your peers that were there to push you to be your best, but also pick you up when things weren't going so well. But you also had your coaches and you had trainings and resources that were all built around unlocking more of your athletic potential. So how do we recreate that same type of environment with the same type of people with all of that business potential because of what sport developed in them, giving them teammates, other members at the post who are there to push you and support you when things aren't going well, give you coaches, give you resources, whatever you need to unlock more of that potential, right? The continued learning, the investment in skill sets to continue to improve as professionals. That's really what it's about. It's a tremendously fun group, just like when you were competing with other athletes. Like it was such a fun group to be a part of. And so we competed a little bit. We did an event at Padel House not too long ago where we got out to compete. We've done pickleball. We're going to do a big summit in October where we're going to introduce a summit cup where we're going to compete in, which you're going to have a leg up on people. We're going to compete in a tennis tournament, a pickleball tournament, a golf tournament, because we're athletes. We still love to compete and that's fun for us. And it's a tremendously fun group to be a part of, but also getting that support, that same support that we had when we played is a really important part of being a member at the post.
I want to go a little bit back to still your initial, ignition of this idea. And how did it come about? Because it cannot be that easy. You were on a path to working finance. There must have been some point in time where you realized this is what I need to do now and why. So can you walk me through that a little bit? Yeah. Was there an instance or something that really triggered this passion of starting the post?
Yeah, there was. So when I kind of bounced around finance, I got introduced to venture capital and entrepreneurship and started kind of putting my entrepreneurial hat on. And originally I was building this app. It was like an interactive learning app for football players to study their playbooks. And so I was kind of designing and building this app. If you know of Duolingo, the language app, it was kind of like, how do we gamify that learning for studying playbooks? And so I was building this, kind of hit a crossroads where I was either going to have to raise money or keep putting my own money into the development of this app, and decided, it's such a niche product. It's going to be really hard to raise money. And I just didn't want to continue to put my own money into it. But got introduced to this entrepreneurship group called Praxis. And Praxis really talks about this idea of creating purposeful businesses. So businesses that go beyond just the bottom line. How do we just make a profit? But no, how do we have a positive impact in the world? And so I started thinking about, well, if I was still building this app, what would be a positive impact that I could make that goes beyond just helping guys study their playbook? And I started thinking about the feelings that I had around, obviously, the transition for athletes. And so I started thinking about, okay, how do we better prepare athletes to transition out of sports? And so I started studying this problem more with my own feelings, but also looking at other resources that were out there and really identified those four pillars, right? The identity issues, the purpose issues, the routine and structure issues, and the community issues, and started designing this product around that. And really felt like the community issue was a good starting point. So going back to how I was trying to fill this void, I was sitting in Soho House one day, feeling super out of place there. And that's where it dawned on me, like, what if we built a space similar to Soho House, but it was full of athletes, right? Like it was all the people that I was longing to be with again. And so that's where it started. Okay, there's these examples of communities like Soho House or like YPO or Chief that are out there, and let's start doing some due diligence on them and what could this look like if we brought it to life for athletes. I had a great thought partner and friend named Ryan Darnell, who runs an early stage venture fund called Max Ventures in the city, who I started telling him about this idea. And I didn't know at the time, but he was a collegiate baseball player, played baseball at Middle Tennessee State. And so he started telling me, like, man, I really love this idea. Would love to be a thought partner and help you validate this idea. Got a lot of validation with him as a thought partner. And so then he helped me bring the business to life and brought on my co-founder. His name's Jason LaRose. Jason was the president of Under Armour for a handful of years, and then went to Equinox Gyms and launched their digital fitness product called Equinox Plus, and then came on board to help me. Now we're a team of 8. We launched in April, over 200 members across the US. We're opening our first physical clubhouse like that Soho House element in New York City next month, actually in September. But yeah, that's how it all started.
Yeah, thank you. And it seems like you're doing fantastic. You mentioned over 200 members. And I'm kind of tracking the application. I actually have to admit I did apply, so hopefully to have a chance to join at some point. But it seems like you have more people applying than you have a space for currently as you're creating this community and structuring all the programs.
Yeah, we've had almost 1,500 people apply. So as we think about who's in the post, so number one, you had to be at least an NCAA athlete, and we really care about three things. Two of them being the qualifiers. The first qualification is you had to be an NCAA athlete, and we weigh your athletic resume with your business resume. So, if you've been a 10-year professional athlete and you've seen the business side of sport, you're bringing through your experience something to the table to the network to provide out of your experience and your expertise. If you were a lesser accomplished athlete, if you were a Division III third string water polo goalie, then you better have a tremendous business resume because you need to bring your experience and your expertise to the network because being a part of the network is a two-way street, right? Like our members need to contribute something to the network so that every member can extract value out of the network. So that's everything about it. And then the third thing is character, right? We just want really high quality people, in the space. So we've had, a ton of applicants. We launched in April with 100 members. We've been intentional about the types of people that we want in early on and creating the right culture within the post. If you look at our demographics of the post, so we're 74% of our members at the VP level above in business. 30% of our members played professional Olympic sports. We have, a bunch of C-level people, including like the chief e-commerce officer at Dick's Sporting Goods. We just had the global CEO of a global ad agency join. We have people who are managing directors of private equity industries or private equity businesses and venture capital businesses or commercial real estate or a lot of, again, there's so many athletes, former athletes that are doing tremendously well in business across all types of industries. And how do we bring them into one roof to, again, this idea of athletes helping athletes, and they're all across the country. I mean, only 40% of them are in New York City. 60% of them are outside of New York City. So, how do we bring them together as much as we can, whether it's in the clubhouse or it's, at an event, our summit, our conference down in Florida in October. We're trying to do more regional events. But one core thing that we do is we put everyone on teams. So this was, as we studied YPO and as we studied Chief, which, is a really tremendously successful women's network. They put people in cohorts, and those cohorts are based off of, 8 to 10 individuals based off of work experience and job title and life experience, and really surrounding people with this idea of having a personal board of advisors that you lean into from a professional standpoint or even a personal standpoint. And, YPO calls them forums, Chief calls them core groups. We call them teams. So everyone gets assigned to a team where they meet on a monthly basis. And we've already seen the power and value of those teams provide so much. I mean, so many examples to talk about. Even from just launching in April. So it's again, how do you surround yourself with people who will push you and support you at the same time?
Yeah, I love that. And it's definitely a concept that I've taken on from athletics. And now as I interviewing former athletes of all different kinds, the support system is so important to thrive. Yeah. We can't achieve things alone. And I always say you're only as good, and people say, right, studies say that you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with because they help
100%.
Lift you up. And so the better people you have around you, the more inspiration you have to elevate your game, whether it's actually in the field or in the field of corporate world or entrepreneurship. I love that.
So true.
Anything you want to talk about? I know it has 4 components as I was studying your website, the community, which we talked about a lot, coaching, team, and the clubhouses, sort of the 4 pillars that you're looking at. Anything you want to add to it, Christian, or that people should know about?
I mean, those 4 pillars are, again, how do we recreate that environment that we have when we play, when it comes down to having the network, your team, those resources and coaching, having that space, that clubhouse, the physical space to belong to, and having experiences and access to the right experiences that build connections between members. And it's about having that space, right? That locker room, I think, was so valuable to athletes because it was this safe space where I can be who I am and I can open up and be vulnerable and ask for help when I needed help, but also tap into that competitiveness and that ambition that other athletes have. It's about supporting when things aren't going well, but it's also more often than not, it's about trying to keep up with those people who are super competitive, who are pulling you along, and you're all trying to pursue being the best at whatever it is, whether it was sports or now it's business. And I think just being a part of that palpable energy, that contagious energy that we once had as athletes. And like you said, we're so influenced by the people we surround ourselves with. And I think specifically the number is like the five people you surround yourself with. So why not surround yourself with 5 people who are defined by their work ethic and their ambition and their competitiveness and their humility? I think that's something that athletes have, right? And the other thing is introspection. I talked about it earlier about self-scouting. One of the least talked about things that athletes are really good at is introspection, identifying things that are going well, but more importantly, things that aren't going well. And how do we continue to do that throughout the rest of our lives and different verticals other than just performance on the field, but performance in work or performance at home as a spouse or a parent. And we should always be running a self-scout and having a lot of introspection and self-awareness, because that is, I think, the key to growth and performance in any part of your life.
Question, this is somewhat personal, but I think it's on point here. Because I've gone through this journey, I think, especially as you mentioned, when you quit your sport, you're going through a big identity crisis. And it hasn't been that long since you've gone through that change. How much of this is actually filling even your own personal passion for having that locker room and recreating that locker room you had from NFL in the real life?
It's 100%. Why? I mean, I always say this as we talk to members or whatever, like, I am building this for myself because I wanted to be around athletes. And thank goodness it's other people feel the same, right? That it's resonating with other people and they're joining as members. But that was the whole motivation to all of this. If you would have built this years ago, I would have been a member a long time ago and I wouldn't have had to build it because it would have already existed. It's a fun opportunity for me to be on the side of building it, but I fully participate as a member. I've put myself, going back to the teams, right? The cohorts that we have, I've put myself on a team. I fully participate in events and compete. And so I kind of play both sides of the coin as being a part of the post in 2 different ways. But it's 100%. I mean, it's the 100% the motivation of why this exists. It definitely fills that void for me to be a part of the athlete community again that I was so desperately missing after leaving football.
And one more question, maybe it could be a tip for your curriculum that you have coaching, or maybe it already is. But from my own experience, being in a corporate world for about 15 years, as athletes, you mentioned it beautifully, we have this introspection and ability to look at the reality with clarity. And we're not afraid to voice that reality, no matter how harsh it can be sometimes. But there's one thing to see that and communicate that to other athletes versus how you communicate that to the other people in the corporate world or even in your business that aren't the athletes. I wonder if you have any lessons around that or mentorship as part of your program.
It's a good question. And you're not the first person to ask that question. I think a lot of athletes have a hard time around, I think as an athlete, we have an inherent self-accountability, right? We hold ourselves accountable at a very high level. And a lot of other people don't have that same high level self-accountability. And a lot of people have a hard time navigating the disparity between ourselves and others. And so I don't have good advice. I think that's something we'll continue to talk about and solve together as a community on how do we get better there. A big part of our curriculum, we teamed up with a group out of UVA called Motivate Labs, a group of professors that study the science of motivation and specifically in sports. And so with the help of their research, we've designed our own experience around that introspection and how do I run a self-scout and identify the things that I can improve? And then how do I come up with a clear mapping of my goals that'll help me achieve the things that I know I need to improve upon? And how do I verbalize those to my teammates who then can hold me to that level of accountability to make sure that I'm achieving those things and to rely on them as they try to help me? We call them wins and we call them assists, right? How do I assist my teammate to help them get a win? And so we've already seen so many people coming together around that idea. But yeah, it's some things that we need to solve. And I think that's why we've heard a lot of our members like, hey, we want to hire more athletes because of those things that you talk about that they bring to the table, that accountability and that work ethic and those things. But yeah, there are some things that we still have to navigate, and we'll talk about it. Those will be fun conversations to have within the community on how do we get better in those areas as we talk to our peers at work who may not have that same level of accountability that we have that's inherent to us as athletes.
Yes, it definitely has been a learning journey for me, especially early on.
Yeah,
so
I bet.
You really have to sometimes put a break on and let others figure their own things out. But yes, it's always fun conversation.
For sure.
Last few questions, call to action, Christian. It seems like you actually do not have problems recruiting people. There is more demand that you can satisfy for. But any message regarding the post you want to get out or a support that you may be looking for as the next step?
We always want people to apply to join. So if you're a former NCAA or collegiate professional Olympic athlete, apply at www.thepost.co is our website. Yes, we've had that many apply, but we're trying to sort through them as fast as possible and identify who's in early on or who we're going to wait a few months to let in. It's definitely not capacity limit. The good thing is because there's so many people across the country, it's not necessarily a limiting factor for us right now. So we're just trying to work through those applications as quick as we can. But for us, if you're a former athlete, apply. And that's how we continue to grow. We want great athletes, great people involved, and people who obviously want to be a part of this community, but also want to contribute to this community in a positive way and be a part of that athletes helping athletes ecosystem that we had before.
One more question. Given all that's going on in the world now, I think there's lots, including,
yes,
I don't have to name things, right? From economies to power struggles worldwide. What would you want to inspire people to be doing more of or less of?
I think, especially in today's environment of social media, right? I think we have a tendency to talk more than we listen. I think it's really easy for us to separate and almost dehumanize other people in the sense that like the person on the other screen isn't like a human being with feelings and thoughts. And we have so much more in common than I think a lot of us have now been convinced of. And I just think if we start there, that this person is more like me than I think I've been convinced, it would help a long way. And I think if we just listen, things are pretty harsh these days and can be so negative. And I think that's one of the great things about sports, right? It's one of the ultimate unifiers where no matter your background, no matter what you look like, no matter what you believe in, sport, regardless of whether it's in the locker room or it's the fans in the stands, has brought in so many different types of people together. And it doesn't have to be sports that unites everyone. It can go far beyond that because, again, we have so much more in common than people realize. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
I love that. It seems like actually what you're building in is exactly that.
Yeah.
One thing that came into mind as you were describing was this inner excitement and enthusiasm. I was thinking about replicating my athletic room of all the different athletes in college that come from different backgrounds and have different skills, from sprinters to marathon runners to baseball, softball, tennis players. And you just get such an amazing mix of cultures, and we all come from different backgrounds and have different opinion, but the focus to excel at whatever we do always united us, and you were able to learn from each other. So it seems like that's exactly what you're creating at the Post. So
yes, that was really well said. It's 100% true. When you look at a team or a locker room, I mean, there's just so many different types of people, and there's so much value there, so much value bringing different types of perspectives and life experiences together. In a world where we're trying to separate and segregate different types of people, like, no, we should be doing the opposite. How do we continue to bring people together? Because that's how we learn and we grow and we advance as a culture. And so we're trying to do our small part in the sports community.
Love it. And cheering for you. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to join at some future point.
Definitely.
So anyone who wants to reach out to you and learn more about the Post, what's the best way?
Probably LinkedIn is the easiest. You can find me on LinkedIn and we can connect there. And I think that's how we got connected. So that's probably the easiest.
Excellent. And I'll add the website and your LinkedIn profile to the episode notes so they can easily look you up.
Perfect.
One more call out to Christian. And please feel free to reach out back to me if I'm wrong on this.
I appreciate it.
What stood out to me from this conversation is your ability to recreate the quarterback position in a real life. You're actually creating something that you can control. and at the same time you're participating in. It seems to be the exact definition of quarterback that you describe. If you enjoyed this episode, I want to ask you to please do two things that would help me greatly. One, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform that you use to listen to this episode. Two, please share this podcast with a friend who you believe might enjoy it as well. It is a great way to remind someone you care about them by sharing a conversation they might be interested in. Thank you for listening.